morning we're going to be in Philippians chapter 1, verses 27 through 30. So Philippians chapter 1, verses 27 through 30. I want you to imagine, and for some of you, you don't have to imagine this, you've experienced it, but for me, I have to imagine it. You just walked out of a busy airport in a foreign country. You don't speak the language. The food smells a little strange. The customs feel unfamiliar. People look at you like you don't quite belong. You're not hostile to their culture. It's just you feel out of place. But then someone spots the little blue book in your hand, right? Your passport. And this passport marks you as a citizen of a different country, of a different place. It's a reminder of where you come from, what your values are, and where you're ultimately headed. That little booklet affects how you're treated, what rights you have, and even how you carry yourself. Ultimately, you're not just a tourist. That might be why you're there, but in the larger scheme of things, you're actually a representative of your homeland. You're a representative of the United States. That's what you're doing. You're representing your country. In a similar way, followers of Jesus are citizens of the kingdom of heaven. We live in this world, but we don't quite belong to it. We might speak the same language, share the same neighborhoods, but we march to a different rhythm. We have a different set of values. Our hope is anchored somewhere else. Our passport, our identity in Jesus should influence everything we do, how we live, how we love, how we respond to what goes on in the world around us. Now, the Apostle Paul writes to the church in the city of Philippi. And when he writes this letter, he reminds these early followers of Jesus that they are foreigners in the world, that they don't fit in, that there should be a feeling like we don't fit in here, that our hearts break over the state of the world, over our country, over the state of our communities. Right? One of the things that Jesus taught us in the Beatitudes is, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Those who mourn are not just those who have experienced a loss, but those who mourn are those who recognize that the world we live in is not the world that God created. That things like sickness and death and abuse and war are indications that the world is out of step with what God intended. And when we see those things happen in this world, our heart should break because we have a different set of values. We have a different set of expectations. We have a different set of hopes than the rest of the world. We belong to the kingdom of heaven, and our allegiance is to King Jesus. It is crucial that we learn to live as citizens of God's kingdom right now. Not sometime in the future, not when Jesus returns to make everything right. No, we live as citizens of God's kingdom right now. Right now. So Paul wrote to the Philippians to thank the church there in Philippi for supporting him, for helping him as he is in prison in Rome. Remember, the state, the Roman Empire, was not providing for the needs of their prisoners. And so they needed to rely on the compassion and generosity of others. And the church of Philippi had sent a big gift to help Paul out. And so he's writing to them primarily to thank them for the gift, to update them on what's going on in his life, how imprisonment is going. And therefore, he takes this opportunity to give them a little bit of instruction as well. And so in Philippians, we run across themes like unity, liberty, salvation, stewardship, and discipleship. And here in chapter 1, Paul explains to the Philippians how the gospel has continued to spread even though he's in prison. So Paul's in prison, probably in house arrest, and he has Roman guards there watching over him. And he is able to receive visitors. And when visitors come, what is Paul talking about? The gospel. And what's happened is that those guards, they've heard the gospel over and over and over again, explained by the Apostle Paul. And they've gone back and they've talked to others about it. But those who have come to visit Paul too, Paul says, they have gained courage from my situation. And they've gone out and they've started to talk about the gospel. And Paul even says that there are some who are preaching the gospel out of false motives. But he says, thank God for that as well. Because even though their motives might be wrong, the gospel is still being proclaimed and people are still coming to Jesus. This is a good thing. And so that gives us the background of where we are. And then Paul moves here at the end of chapter 1. He moves to give them some instructions. And here, Paul outlines 3 life patterns that need to be part of our lives as we live as citizens of the kingdom of heaven. Now, this was interesting for the church at Philippi, because Philippi was a Roman colony, which meant that many in that city were Roman citizens. Right? Not everybody was a Roman citizen. Sometimes it was hard, very hard to gain Roman citizenship. And as a Roman colony, as Roman citizens, they understood that part of their job was to represent Rome throughout the empire. In fact, one of the things that happened is that soldiers who retired, they didn't have a retirement plan. Their retirement plan was that they got to be moved, that they got some land, they got property, and oftentimes in other parts of the empire. What that allowed to happen is then you have all these veterans stationed in all these colonies around the empire, so when an uprising happened, you already have people there to deal with it. And so these people took very great pride in the fact that they were Roman citizens. Paul is using that to say, okay, how Roman citizens are expected to live, this is how you're expected to live as a citizen in the kingdom of heaven. And so he's using their understanding of citizenship to talk about how they are to live their lives. So let's take a look here at Philippians chapter 1, starting with verse 27. Above all, you must live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ. Then whether I come and see you again or only hear about you, I will know that you are standing together with one spirit and one purpose, fighting together for the faith, which is the good news. Don't be intimidated in any way by your enemies. This will be a sign to them that they are going to be destroyed, but that you are going to be saved, even by God himself. For you have been given not only the privilege of trusting in Christ, but also the privilege of suffering for him. We are in this struggle together. You have seen my struggle in the past, and you know that I am still in the midst of it. So here I think Paul outlines three patterns that need to be part of our lives so we can live as citizens of the kingdom of heaven. So what are these patterns? Well, the first pattern that should be evident in our lives is the pattern of loyalty. The pattern of loyalty. Verse 27. Above all, you must live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ. Then, whether I come and see you again or only hear about you, I will know that you are standing together with one spirit and one purpose, fighting together for the faith, which is the good news. The expectation Paul gives us is that we are to conduct our lives in a way that is worthy of the gospel. Now, one of the interesting things I find here is that word conduct. Conduct yourself. Because when I originally started to put this together, when I knew I was going to be gone on vacation and then have a short week to put a message together, I chose this because we had been going through Philippians on Wednesday evenings. And one of the reasons I chose this was the phrase, you must live as citizens of heaven, which is found in the New Living Translation. But if you look at other translations, in fact, all the other translations I was reading this week, they don't have that phrase there. Which then I'm like, what in the world's going on here? So as I started to study, one of the things I discovered is that word conduct yourselves, or the word conduct. Actually, in the Greek, the fuller meaning of that is to conduct yourselves as citizens. It's all about how you live as citizens of the empire or citizens of the community. And so what the New Living Translation does is to help you understand what Paul is meaning by inserting that phrase, live as citizens of heaven. So Paul is addressing the fact that they, as Christians in Philippi, must conduct themselves in a way that is in line with being citizens of the kingdom of heaven. And if you're going to be a citizen of a country, if you're going to be a citizen of a nation, if you're going to be a citizen of the kingdom, one of the criteria is that of loyalty. Primarily, in this situation, when we're talking about a kingdom, loyalty to the king. If we're going to conduct ourselves as citizens of the kingdom of heaven, first and foremost, we have to be loyal to King Jesus. Our allegiance needs to be to King Jesus above everything else. And we are to live our lives in light of that reality and the way that he has taught us to live. Right? So we think back to the Sermon on the Mount, the fact that we are to love one another, to love our enemies. We are to pray for those who persecute us. We are to not worry. We're to trust God. We're to forgive. And, that is how we are to live. The way we live should be different from the rest of the world. Our values should be different from the rest of the world. Yeah, there might be times when we find alignment here and there, but overall, our whole system of how we live is different than the world around us. And so we are to be loyal to the kingdom, loyal to the king. But there's another loyalty that we find here, because Paul says, I want to know that you guys are striving together for the gospel, that you're working together for the gospel. All successful athletic teams, there's a loyalty that is evident among them. When you have dysfunction within a team, when there's dysfunction, when there's one player or a couple players just playing for themselves, there's not going to be a whole lot of success. So Paul says, no, I want you to strive together. I want you to learn together. I want you to work together. There needs to be a loyalty with one another. And so our lives as citizens of the kingdom of heaven should be defined by loyalty. First, our loyalty to Jesus, and then our loyalty to one another. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, Jesus says this, no one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. Money is not the only thing that we can give our allegiance, our loyalty to, that can compete with our allegiance to King Jesus. There's a whole lot of other things. And it's important that us as followers of Jesus take time and examine our hearts and ask God to reveal what other loyalties might be there in our hearts that are keeping us from really giving our loyalty, our allegiance to King Jesus. Because if we're going to be loyal citizens of the kingdom, our allegiance needs to be to King Jesus and Him alone. That is what needs to happen. Where is our allegiance? And when our allegiance is with King Jesus, what's naturally going to follow is there's going to be a loyalty that we experience among His people. Because we know that we're in this together. We're all citizens of the same kingdom. We all want to see the same thing happen. And this is why I want us to see Bethlehem as a disciple-making church. Right? This is basically what Paul is asking of the Philippians. I want you guys to be striving for the gospel. I want you to be working together for the sake of the gospel. And that's my cry, that's my prayer, that's what I want to see us doing here. That we are working together to make disciples, to introduce people to Jesus, people who don't know Jesus yet, so that they can give their allegiance, their loyalty to King Jesus. And I want us to encourage one another as we grow, as we mature in our discipleship. But what this means is that we all have a part to play in making disciples, from teaching to praying to worship to serving to whatever. We all have a part to play, and I want us to find that part so that we can be we can be doing this work of the kingdom together, striving together, loyal to one another. That is my heart. That's what I want to see. The second pattern that we see here that needs to be evident in our lives is courage. Verse 28. Verse 28. So Philippians chapter 1, verse 28. Don't be intimidated in any way by your enemies. This will be a sign to them that they're going to be destroyed, but that you're going to be saved, even by God himself. There's going to be opposition. Satan is not going to stand idly by and let the kingdom expand. And so this opposition that we're going to experience will come in various different forms. It can come in the form of pushback and rejection from our friends and family. Like, what in the world are you doing? Why would you do that? Like, there's going to be some of that. In some cases, thankfully, this isn't really what we experience here in the United States, but in some cases, and this has been true for the history of the Christianity for the church, there's going to be persecution that comes from the state. They're going to say, we don't want this here. You're disrupting the things that are happening here. In fact, in the case of Rome, they will say, you're angering the gods because you're following this religion, so we need to do away with you. And so sometimes this opposition that we experience comes in the form of persecution. But also, it can come as the form of attacks on us spiritually, whether they come as mental attacks, spiritual attacks, even physical attacks. That sometimes, really, when you get right down to it, everything that we experience is some form of spiritual attack. Because it's rooted in sin, it's rooted in this opposition to what God is doing. And Paul wants us, with that knowledge, to be courageous, to stand firm with courage, knowing that this is going to come. And that when we stand firm, when we have courage, that's going to be a sign, Paul says. It's going to be a sign to those who oppose us, whether it's people, actual other human beings, or whether it's these dark powers and principalities that run this world. It's going to be a sign to them. Our courage, our faith, our loyalty to Jesus is going to be a sign to them that they're on the wrong path, that they're headed down the road to destruction. But our courage, on the other hand, is a sign to ourselves. It's a sign to those around us that we're on the right path, that we're headed in the right direction, and that we are going to be saved ultimately by God himself. That's why it's important for us when we go through trials and we go through tribulations and we go through tragedies that we remain faithful, that we show courage, because that's a sign to those around us to keep on going. Don't give up. Because Paul, even when in prison, when people came to visit him, he says they found their courage because if I can go through it here, they can go through it too. That was a sign for them. Courage is a sign. This courage is a result of knowing who we are, that we're part of the kingdom of God, that we're citizens of God's kingdom. Consider Rosa Parks in 1955. She refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus. Her quiet courage wasn't just about one moment. It also helped spark a movement. She knew who she was and what was right, and her stand helped change history. As citizens of heaven, our courage can have a ripple effect as well, pointing people to King Jesus. So how do we grow in courage? Because we don't find courage just by saying, oh, I need to be more courageous. I need to be brave. No, we find our courage when we're with other people. When we are in a community of others. I know that when I am with people and I am faced with doing something I don't want to do, when I'm faced with doing something I'm afraid of doing, that presence of other people in my life give me courage. It doesn't take away the fear, it doesn't take away the uncertainty, but it gives me courage to face what is coming at me. And we find our courage, we find that ability when we're surrounded by a community of people who are encouraging us, who are helping us, who are praying for us. That's why it's so crucial for us to be part of a community, a church community, because that's going to help us as we face the challenges of life. The third pattern that should be evident in our lives is that of awareness. Verses 29 and 30. For you have been given not only the privilege of trusting in Christ, but also the privilege of suffering for him. You are in this struggle. We are in this struggle together. You have seen my struggle in the past, and you know that I am still in the midst of it. So Paul says here, because of the gospel, because we have heard the gospel, we have heard the truth, we've responded to that truth, we have been given this privilege of putting our loyalty, our allegiance in King Jesus. So we have the privilege of being citizens of the kingdom of heaven. But along with this privilege, Paul says that there's another privilege. And that privilege, we may wonder how much of a privilege it really is. We receive this privilege of suffering for Jesus. Suffering for the kingdom. I would actually put it this way, that because we have the privilege of being citizens of the kingdom of heaven, we have been given the responsibility to suffer for the kingdom. This goes back to that last point. This suffering comes in various shapes and sizes. But Paul says it's going to come. Jesus suffered while he was on earth to secure our salvation. We as his followers shouldn't think that somehow we're going to escape suffering. As we seek to work together to expand the gospel, to expand God's kingdom, we're going to suffer. And so Paul wants us to be aware of this reality, that we shouldn't be surprised when bad things happen to us, when things don't go our way. No, it's part of the reality of working for the kingdom of God. Be aware of that. And the fact that we receive this suffering is not evidence that we lack faith in God. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Think about the marathon runner, right? Even though she is trained for a marathon, by the time they hit mile 20 and that pain starts to come in, get tired, that's not evidence that they're failing. It's evidence that they're in the race. And same goes with suffering. When we experience, it's not evident that, oh man, my faith is weak. Oh, I have some sin in my life. No, it's not evidence of that, though that might be true. No, it's evidence that there is opposition against us, that we live in a broken and fallen world, that we're still waiting for Jesus to come back and make everything right. And so we continue to suffer well. And so when we face tragedy, when we face suffering, we need to remember what Paul wrote in Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. Right? That even in our pain, God is at work. He's at work in the world. He's at work in our lives. So don't get up. Don't give up, even when things get tough. Paul's words here in Philippians chapter 1, verses 27 through 30, paint a vivid picture. As citizens of heaven, we are called to live differently. We're not just passing through this world, we're ambassadors of God's kingdom, showing the world what heaven looks like. And so we need to be loyal. Let your life reflect the gospel in every choice and stand united with your church family, with Bethlehem, right? For the sake of Jesus. Be courageous. Don't just let fear or opposition silence your faith. Trust God's power and stand firm. And be aware. Embrace suffering as part of the journey, knowing it connects us to Jesus and to his church. Think about a lighthouse standing firm in a stormy sea. The light doesn't waver, no matter how fierce the waves. And that's what our lives can be as citizens of the kingdom of heaven. A steady, shining testimony of God's kingdom, guiding others to safety in King Jesus. So here's our big idea this morning. Our citizenship in heaven shapes the way we live here on earth. Our citizenship in heaven shapes the way that we live here on earth. This is crucial because our lives are the best evidence for the truth of the gospel. People want to see that following Jesus really does make a difference in their lives. And the only place that they can look is to us. Live as citizens of the kingdom. So here's the challenge. This week in your prayers, because all of this starts with prayer. Right? If we want to see God at work in our lives, if we want to see God at work in this world, if we want to see God at work here at Bethlehem, the place to start is prayer. That's the place to start. So this week in your prayers, ask God to help you form a community of people to support you. That's what we need. We cannot go alone. Following Jesus is not a solo activity. It is meant to be done in community with one another. That's why one of the things that the early church devoted themselves to, right? Acts chapter 2, verse 42, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship. Being together, we need to be together. So ask God to help you form a community of believers to support you. Erwin McManus, in his little book, Stand Against the Wind, wrote this: there are moments when our greatest act of faith is to remain faithful. Faith is not always the way out of a crisis. In fact, it rarely is. But faith gives us the strength and the confidence to see every challenge and crisis through to the end. Faith is a confidence in God that results in faithfulness. That faithfulness gives us the power to persevere. And I believe that's what these three patterns, loyalty, courage, awareness, I think that's what faithfulness looks like. That when we have faith, we will be loyal. When we have faith, we will be courageous. When we have faith, we will be aware of what is going on. Our faithfulness looks like loyalty, courage, and awareness. We are to be faithful to God no matter what.